Welcome to Two Homes. This podcast explores the relationship between our inner world and the systems we live within, from our bodies and beliefs to the businesses, destinations, and environments we shape. Because sustainability that isn't embodied doesn't last, and well-being that stays at the surface level doesn't change much at all. Together, we'll explore what it really takes to build systems that support people, places, and the planet over the long term. From leadership and organizational culture to the hidden patterns that shape how we live, work, and travel. This is an invitation to look a little deeper and to discover how meaningful change often starts closer to home than we think. Hello and welcome to Two Homes. I'm your host, Sarah Rhodes, and today's topic is on the financial opportunity that isn't being talked about enough. And I'm really excited to dive into this because for a very long time, I really didn't want to talk about the financial side of sustainability. It felt like something that was not so clear cut. And I also didn't want to make any false claims around what was happening on the financial aspect of sustainability. Now, after some time has passed and I've seen some of the really amazing financial benefits of sustainability, I feel much more open to this conversation and I'm really excited to dive in. There are two popular narratives around cost and sustainability. That is the one where sustainability costs more. Maybe you've come across that one. And the other one is that travelers are willing to pay more. And that's one that I find particularly interesting. So today we're going to look at both of those and what's actually costing businesses the most right now. In Naomi Klein's book, This Changes Everything, she highlighted that back in the 70s when global trade agreements and global environmental agreements were established, there was a clause that said that environmental action shouldn't get in the way of global trade. And that's the trajectory we've been on. Profit first at the cost of everything else. It's become the operating system. So today I want to uncover why that hasn't actually been in our best interests. And it's not just about saving forests and protecting the oceans. Whilst they're incredibly important, our livelihoods depend on them, there's much more to it than that. Sustainability and profit are not competing. And in many cases, genuine sustainability is where the actual profit is. So today we're going to look at that. We're going to categorize it and dig into it and pull it apart. And then we're going to see what it all adds up to when you compound the impacts of sustainability over time. We've been taught that perpetual growth is the only measure of success. Year on year, up is the only direction, and when it doesn't go up, we've failed. We've been culturally conditioned to believe that to be true. And I think that's part of why this conversation has been so hard and why I've wrestled myself with charging fees and making money from teaching people how to do sustainability better. I've bought into the lies and no longer am I going to, and I hope you don't either. This shows up in political cycles, which are short-term, popularity-driven, and there's no incentive for long-term planning. It shows up in our business operating systems as well. The budget for sustainability is only there if there's something left over. And it shows up in how we feel about change. The nervous system treats change as a threat. And we've covered that in episodes 2 and 7. So today we're focusing on the outer system, but it's good to keep in mind that they're related. The result we find ourselves facing is that we're operating in survival mode, we're making short-term decisions, and we're ignoring the incremental erosion that's happening in our industry, our destinations, and our well-being. And like cigarette smoking was in the day, we know it's not good, but the damage is slow enough to ignore. So our question for today is, what if we looked at this differently? What if sustainability isn't the cost, but that not doing it is? A couple of the biggest costs hiding in plain sight impacting businesses the most under the profit first mindset are the huge amounts of high staff turnover, staff disengagement, excessive sick days. They're also the energy wastage, the food wastage, reputational erosion, and greenwashing repercussions, not to mention regulatory scrambling, which at this stage of things is only going to get worse. These aren't necessarily sustainability costs, they're operating costs that most businesses have normalized. But that's what we're working with today, and they're very connected to sustainability. So we're going to look at 4 categories, and for each one I'll walk through the opportunity and what the return looks like, and roughly when it pays back. And then we'll look at what happens when you compound them all together. Because I think one of the mistakes that we've been making so far is we're looking at sustainability as a like for like and exchange this for that. And that's where this narrative around sustainability being more expensive seems to be most true. But when we look at it in a holistic way, we start to see that one is not better than the other. We start to see that there are actually big paybacks that we're missing out on. Let's start by looking at energy and water. These are amongst the biggest operating costs individually, and also some of the biggest environmental footprints for a hotel. They're also where some of the fastest payback periods exist. On energy, changing air conditioning default temperature settings alone can produce up to 30 to 60% savings in that system. LED lighting retrofits pay back within 2 to 3 years. And like we've seen with so many things, this is getting more efficient and more cost effective, and those timeframes are getting shorter. Smart building management systems typically return 20 to 30% energy savings, and solar hot water doesn't have to be an all or nothing. One hotel covered most of their hot water from solar and ran everything else off the grid. That's a great solution. It's not saying that just because we can't get solar to cover 100% didn't mean it wasn't worth it. So staged implementation is still implementation. And even if they don't go anywhere further with their solar, they're still covering most of their hot water every single day, every single year. And that's a cost saving after a very short payback time. It is important to note that this can sometimes be challenging because managed hotels pay the operating costs, but the owner pays the capital costs. So neither has a full incentive to fully invest, and that gap needs to be acknowledged, I think, and perhaps negotiated, not avoided. Certainly in the times when I was working with small businesses, we would coach small businesses on how to have those conversations with the companies they were leasing their properties from to try and bring awareness, and also to try and shift things, try and see a mutually beneficial outcome. Water is a major source of wastage, and sometimes that can be in the housekeeping systems. It's very easy to blame the guest and say, oh, they're having long showers because they're on holidays and they're not paying the water bill. But sometimes it's the multiple toilet flushes per room clean that's sending litres and litres of water down the drain. It's overwashing linen when the guest has asked for the linen to be retained, and it's not having granularity or transparency over where the water is going, room by room, department by department. Without that baseline, it's hard to measure the improvement and find the opportunities to save. The second category is waste and procurement. Food waste is a significant cost centre, and a third of all food in Australia is wasted. So whilst diverting food waste from landfill, which is now becoming mandatory as well, even if you were doing it voluntarily or are doing it voluntarily, what's actually going into that food waste? It's one thing to compost, it's another thing to be throwing perfectly good food into the compost. So the weight tells you how much is there, but the content tells you what's happening. And that's where the reduction can happen upstream. It's a cost saving and it improves the environmental footprint. Procurement, purchasing is another one of the biggest costs for any hotel. And in the early days of PFC, we developed a break-even point calculation to help businesses see their return on investment for transitioning from single-use to reusable. a small boutique hotel implementing a filtered water refill system instead of individually bottled water, even in a low-tech way, can save thousands of dollars per year once the infrastructure cost is paid off. The same logic applies to any sustainability investment. You take the upfront cost, you figure out the annual savings, and then work out how long it's taking to pay back. These calculations are often not being done because most people are just looking at the upfront cost. Most of the time, the down-the-line savings are not being considered, and there's a huge gap there. Similarly, a phased approach, like when I was talking about the solar panels on the hotel with their hot water, this can also be effective. Maybe it is refill water stations available in addition to bottled water in the room. It doesn't have to be one or the other, and having options available and allowing the customer some choices, some opportunities to refill, even if there is still individual bottled water in the room, is not a bad thing. I think we've been caught in this trap that it has to be perfect, but perfect is the enemy of good. The third category is staff retention and engagement. I looked at the data in episode 11, and with high amounts of turnover, close to 40%, with incredible costs per departure and a retention gap, not a talent gap, the industry is short of workplaces worth staying in, not short of people. Disengaged staff treat sick day quotas as a target to reach. They're less present, less productive, less connected to guests, and that affects the brand's reputation and return visitation. Engaging staff in sustainability gives them awareness, gives them agency, and involves them in the solutions. It makes them part of the story. This produces higher engagement, lower absenteeism, and longer tenure. This isn't idealism, it's one of the consistent findings across research and across the work that I've done with businesses over the last 11 years. It might seem like a no-brainer, but actually training staff and engaging them on the towel policy will help to reduce laundering costs. The payback on that training can be weeks, not years. Bringing them into the story, into the understanding, the bigger picture and the values is the kind of calculation that belongs in more boardroom conversations. And the fourth category I'd like to touch on is the revenue and yield. This is the category that gets the least attention in sustainability conversations, and I think there's some huge potential here. With engaged staff in reservations having a wider conversation with guests, what have you stayed an extra night? The weather is better midweek. Here's what's happening nearby. Did you know about XYZ? Every additional night improves yield and reduces the cost of room turnover. The link between staff engagement and revenue per available room is real and really underexplored. I stay in a lot of hotels. I've never been asked that I can think of in a meaningful way if I want to stay for a particular reason. Sure, there's upsells, but they're rarely pointed out if I book online through an OTA. They're rarely explored. I'm rarely asked whether I wouldn't mind staying just a little bit longer. And when I say rarely, I mean never. And then there's the issue of once-in-a-lifetime destinations. I know this from having lived in several of them. Some guests are never coming back, but it doesn't mean we shouldn't invest in their experience. And it doesn't mean investing in that won't pay off. Word of mouth is still one of the most powerful marketing tools. One guest treated like a person rather than a booking tells people what their experience was like. And in the age of influence, that has real reach and a value that no OTA can replicate. In corporate travel, sustainability credentials are increasingly a booking requirement, not just a preference. Tour companies in Southeast Asia were doing this over a decade ago, and it's now become mainstream in corporate travel management. If you can't demonstrate credible sustainability practice, you fall off preferred supplier lists. And this is not a dramatic loss, but it is a slow erosion over time, and it's hard to trace until it's significant. A Penn State study across 166 hospitality firms in 36 different countries found that companies with higher ESG scores, particularly in high-income nations such as Australia, saw more significant financial gains. The gains are larger in the high-income market because there's more to save, the costs are higher, wastage is greater, and the distance from genuine sustainability is a lot further. So none of these categories in isolation feels transformational, but a hotel that addresses energy, water, waste, and staff retention simultaneously in 1 year is building a fundamentally different cost structure by year 3. If we were to look at a 100-room property that reduces energy costs by 20%, reduces laundering costs through better systems, retains 3 more senior staff members, and increases the average length of stay by 0.3 nights through better reservation conversations, is in a pretty good position. They're not dramatic changes, but compounded across time with lower replacement costs, lower energy bills, improved guest reviews, and better corporate travel placement, the financial picture looks very different from the one that they started with. This is the conversation I want more operators having with their accountants. Not can we afford sustainability, but what is it costing us not to have started? The true cost of doing it cheaply is buying cheap, buying twice. It's currently showing up in grad sustainability managers in isolated roles, in part-time appointments of someone without the background in sustainability, or the full-time employee that's handed sustainability on top of their existing job. These all carry costs that don't show up as sustainability costs. They show up as turnover, burnout, disengagement, higher sick days, or initiatives that never actually get implemented. And the perception of consultants as expensive needs some examining. Fractional expertise is becoming more common. It's bringing in someone with 11 years of experience and a track record with hundreds of businesses, engaged at the point of need rather than carried as an overhead. It's more agile, and it's often more commercially efficient than any of the other alternatives. So the question isn't whether to invest, it's where the investment goes. The flow-on effect touches so many other aspects of the business. The brand reputation, the customer retention, and risk mitigation, being ahead of regulation rather than scrambling to comply when auditors are booked out and fines are coming in for late compliance. Finance and insurance industries are pricing climate and sustainability risk into asset valuations. The operators who've built genuine practice here have a head start over those whose assets will be reassessed downward. The ripple effect is in the suppliers you can influence, the guests who go home and live differently, staff whose families see things change, and communities that benefit from a hotel genuinely embedded in them. The supply chain adapts around what's needed. Cheap online purchases are available because we have a more, never enough culture going on around us. But what if we slowed down and looked at that? What if we had conversations and chose suppliers and worked with suppliers to create better quality, better lasting, better sustainability? It's the guests who want to travel sustainably actually seeing that through, actually feeling like their travel had a lighter footprint and feeling good about it afterwards. It's the staff who are lit up and motivated to go and talk to their families and neighbours and friends about how they're doing things in the workplace and how they might apply that in their own home. And it's from communities that benefit from a hotel being there rather than being impacted by it negatively. The community is part of the offering. It might not seem like it, but when a guest steps outside the 4 walls of your hotel, what's happening in the community is part of their experience. The trouble is, like with the cigarette analogy of the smoker who doesn't see the impact that's eroding their health, the risk of doing nothing in sustainability is not dramatic. It's not a cliff edge. It is a slow compounding of costs that have been normalized. A slow melding of competitive similarity so that everything is all just a little bit the same. And a slow accumulation of the regulatory risk and the slow loss of staff and guests who are going to choose somewhere better that gives them a better reason to stay. So the invitation from today's episode: how do we reframe the investment conversation from not how can we afford this, but what is it actually costing us not to? Sustainability done well is not a cost center, it's a revenue center. And finally, I feel like the data is here, that I can talk about this confidently and I can see the truth in it. And that feels pretty good. Because whilst it's one thing to operate sustainability because it is the right thing to do, it's another thing to actually reap the rewards of doing the right thing. And that's going to feel really good. This is the first conversation of what I hope will be a deepening conversation over time. This is incredibly important, and there's so much opportunity to take advantage of sustainability, not to exploit it, but to be a truly sustainable company that gets all of the benefits that come along with that. Thank you for being here. I appreciate your time on going on this journey with me as we uncover what it means to be sustainable in tourism and in ourselves. I'm your host, Sarah Rhodes, and if you've loved this episode, please leave a review wherever you're listening to this podcast and feel free to share it with your colleagues. I'll see you next time.